Okay, welcome back, everybody, and welcome back from the holiday break. And it's good to see we have Mr. Hare as a substitute in today. Seeing that we have quorum, we'll get started. And today is going to be the first day in our study on women human rights defenders. And we're very pleased today to have with us two people who have been working in this field for a very long time. We have Rachel Vincent, who is the Director of Advocacy and Media for the Nobel Women's Initiative, which was created in 2006 by 6 female winners of the Nobel Peace Prize to support women's groups around the world on justice, peace, and equality. And we also have with us Beth Waroniuk, who is the policy lead for Match International Women's Fund, which is an NGO that funds women's rights movements and grassroots organizations around the world, especially in the Global South. So we're very pleased to have the two witnesses today. And just recalling that this is the first meeting of a study on women human rights defenders that the committee is going to be undertaking in the coming weeks. So we'll start with Ms. Vincent. So if you would like to start, you have 10 minutes for your opening remarks.
Great. Madam Chair, subcommittee members, thank you very much for the opportunity, the invitation to appear before you today. And of course, my congratulations to all of you for taking on this important study of women human rights defenders. In the more than a decade that I have worked at Nobel Women's Initiative, I have met and had the honor to work directly with hundreds of women human rights defenders, primarily from conflict countries. I have learned from these women not only about the risks and the threats they face, but also about the remarkable levels of courage they possess. I wish I could say I would exhibit the same level of courage when faced with similar circumstances. However, I'm not sure I would. These are individuals who, despite even direct threats to their safety, will boldly face off against injustice and defend the rights of their communities. While we might not all have the right stuff to do what they do, it is our responsibility, in my view, to support and protect those who take these risks. A study on women human rights defenders is topical and urgently important for a number of reasons. Many of those reasons you are very familiar with. With a global resurgence in civil strife and conflict in recent years in countries as diverse as Syria, Yemen, Burundi, Cameroon, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, to name just a few, women human rights defenders face unique challenges. We know from the research, and some of you have heard me say this before, that women defenders are pivotal in promoting sustainable peace and play key roles in negotiating local ceasefires and acting as first responders in crises. Yet, as you know, they are largely excluded from peace processes and politics, are often criminalized for their work, and face gender-based violence. Secondly, we also know that with the rise in authoritarianism as well as populism and the many different forms of fundamentalisms in many parts of the world, freedom of expression and other freedoms of fundamental freedoms are under attack, and space for civil society and women's organizations is closing. While globally there, of course, has been much progress on women's rights, and we need to celebrate that, the truth is the pendulum has also swung the other way, and we have to be vigilant. This trend widens the inequality gap and threatens security for all women, indeed all of us, but in particular, those women and women's movements on the front lines of trying to prevent the backlash. Third, and perhaps most importantly, the oppression of girls and women because they are girls and women is still far too common, and those who break gender and social norms and speak out against injustice face a wide range of violence, including intimidation, harassment, rape, sexual torture, and of course, even murder. In this global context, I don't have to tell you, it is critically important that countries who care about human rights and obviously about their commitments and principles that they claim to be committed to, ensure that they have a comprehensive and robust strategy for protecting women and LGBTIQ plus human rights defenders, both domestically and globally. We are here today because we believe now is the time for Canada to take such leadership. Such leadership will be key to enabling that defenders can carry out, particularly women, can carry out their legitimate and important work. In 2013, the UN General Assembly passed a resolution on women human rights defenders. This resolution urges states to put in place specific gender laws and policies for the protection of women defenders and their families, and urges that defenders themselves are involved in the design and implementation of these measures. Canada indeed is making some advances. For example, the development of guidelines on human rights defenders that most of you are familiar with, called Voices at Risk, and now being revised by Global Affairs Canada to address, among other things, the unique situation of women. But frankly, if Canada is serious about human rights and women human rights defenders, we need much more than a set of guidelines. My colleague Beth, in a few minutes, will review with you some areas we hope that your study will touch upon. And of course, we will provide you with names of individuals and organizations that we think will help shape your thinking and help build a complete story. But first, we thought it'd be helpful to focus on who is a woman human rights defender and why she can require special consideration, support, and protection. And here I'll start with the official definition from the UN Human Rights Office of the High Commission, which is that women human rights defenders are those who engage in the promotion and protection of women's rights and gender equality, as well as, frankly, anything to do with human rights. But in concrete and human terms, based on my decade of documenting women human rights defenders, I think what's probably a more easy way to remember it is that really defenders are hard to describe and come from all walks of life. They come from a range of backgrounds. They include activists, journalists, lawyers, health professionals, doctors, farmers, politicians, and leaders of social movements. Many, like Yazidi activist Nadia Murad, who last year, of course, won the Nobel Peace Prize, become human rights defenders because of lived experience and an overwhelming sense that somebody has to take up this work, and because they understand what's at stake, they need to be the ones to take up that work, and they want to prevent future human rights abuses from happening to others. For this work, of course, they face huge risks. In 2017, Frontline Defenders recorded the killings of 44 women human rights defenders, which was an increase from the previous 2 years. But we know that this statistic is only, frankly, the tip of the iceberg, and that there's a lot of abuse that is not documented. Attacks against women who stand up to demand their human rights are widespread and often designed to put women in their place. Not surprisingly, as in the case of Nadia Murad, who experienced sexual slavery and rape, sexual violence is often the weapon of choice. Sexual violence is used by states, and this includes military as well as police, but also by a wide range of other actors, including armies, militias, paramilitary, and those working in the drug trade and private security firms working for resource companies. It is used as a way to silence women human rights defenders. Attacks against women are often distinguished by those against men because they are, frankly, more personal in nature. And I'm sure as politicians, some of you in the room can attest to this. For example, women often experience threats from family members and communities, in addition to threats from state security forces and non-state actors. Family members sometimes disapprove of the defender speaking out and violating social expectations, and react with threats and even violence. Imagine honor killings, for example. Religious extremists also attack women defenders as being sluts and as threats to the society's moral code. As well, and this is a growing area of concern, digital and online harassment often takes different forms for women defenders, with much more explicit attacks on a woman's sexuality, her alleged failure as a mother, a wife, a daughter, and her credibility and legitimacy is frequently attacked. Women human rights defenders are increasingly reporting hyper-sexualized smear campaigns and defamation which aim to limit their activism and erode their support. But who among women human rights defenders are most at risk? Well, the research shows that marginalized women defenders are among those most at risk, and I'll just go quickly through who those women are. Those are the women working on sexual and reproductive rights, younger activists, the younger ones are often more attacked. Poor women, Indigenous women, those women working in rural and remote locations with fewer connections to the women's movement. And of course, those working as Global Witness has documented on land grabs and resource exploitation. Displaced defenders, including those women who end up in neighboring countries or internally displaced, are also at great risk and struggle to maintain their work while also meeting the very basic needs of their families. I'll end with saying that last November, just 2 months ago, I spent a week in Istanbul with a group of Yemeni women activists, many of whom are young journalists. Most of them are under the age of 30, and most of them had directly experienced the war, having brothers or sons who had been recruited as child soldiers or teen soldiers by primarily the Houthi. These were women who were traumatized, had high levels of PTSD, and yet spent a week, and they are not paid to be activists, by the way. None of them are paid activists. Spent a week with me learning how they could better advocate for themselves with the global community to bring attention to the women who are seeking peace and to bolster the analysis and response of women on the ground. I mean, they are the first responders, but to bolster the sort of funding and resources going to these women so that they could do the work they need to do. I hope that in these comments, I think I've built a picture that they are a variety, and these Yemeni women are typical of what it takes to take on a war, but are chronically undersupported and underfunded. So thank you again for taking on this study, and I'll hand off to my colleague, Beth.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vincent. And now we will hear from Beth Woroniak.
Madam Chair, subcommittee members, thank you for the invitation to appear before you today. I join with my fellow witness and with other Canadian organizations in congratulating you on taking on this important study on women human rights defenders. We also hope that you will include attention to LGBTIQ defenders in your deliberations. My colleague Rachel from the Nobel Women's Initiative has presented an excellent introduction outlining the specific challenges faced by women human rights defenders. This gives a context for the study and reinforces why it is important to hear from and understand the specific challenges these women human rights defenders face. The Match International Women's Fund works with women human rights defenders and LGBTQ defenders in a number of countries, providing core support to their organizations and accompanying them in their brave work. In my time, I'd like to scope out briefly 3 key areas that we hope you will explore in your study. First, global good practice, so that Canada can learn from what other governments are doing and build on these successes. Second, the good practices and gaps in Canada's current approach to women human rights defenders. And third, the concrete steps Canada can take to better support women human rights defenders. Let me look at each of these in turn. First, we suggest you investigate cutting-edge practices by other governments that Canada can learn from. If we are to be a leader in this field, then we must not only know what others are doing, but also go beyond and do better. One practice that merits greater understanding is swift assistance to support emergency visas and temporary shelter for human rights defenders. This is an element in the European Union's guidelines on human rights defenders at risk. For example, the Netherlands Action Plan for Human Rights Defenders commits to facilitate the temporary relocation of defenders at risk. In addition, the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs has established a network of shelter cities where human rights defenders can stay for 3 months. Second, we urge you to investigate what Canada is currently doing well and where there are gaps. For example, what can we learn from the support given to the Canadian organization Rainbow Railroad that helped gay and bisexual men and women leave Chechnya in mid-2017? Awareness is growing on the specific needs and situations of women human rights defenders, but clearly much more needs to be done to make our diplomats and policymakers aware of the wide range of issues Rachel has outlined. As Rachel mentioned, Global Affairs Canada is currently updating its guidelines for human rights defenders, entitled Voices at Risk. We're told that the new guidelines will be released this spring. During this revision process, Canadian civil society organizations have urged greater and more specific attention to women human rights defenders, as well as LGBTIQ defenders. We have urged Global Affairs Canada to hear directly from frontline defenders. Once the new guidelines are released, the subcommittee could hear from witnesses on how the updated guidelines will be rolled out and how they will be supported by training and funding. It would also be interesting to ask how women human rights defenders will be made aware of these guidelines so they know what support they can ask for and expect from Canada. We also hope the subcommittee will hear from Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada to better understand how emergency visas can be issued to women human rights defenders at risk and include their families. The third area we hope that the subcommittee will look at is to investigate concrete recommendations on how Canada can better respond to the situation and needs of women human rights defenders and LGBTIQ defenders. We have a number of issues that we suggest you look at. First, raising awareness of the specific challenges faced by women human rights defenders. We congratulate the committee on your intention to listen directly to women human rights defenders and LGBTIQ defenders, as it will be clear that they face particular challenges that deserve more attention. It is crucial that Canadian diplomats and policymakers become more familiar with the diverse situations of different groups of human rights defenders. General policies, initiatives, and guidelines that do not highlight the specific situations of women human rights defenders will actually fail these defenders. In order for Canada to support women human rights defenders, their work and their challenges must be visible and understood. A second set of recommendations could look at a whole-of-government approach. Strategies to support women human rights defenders go beyond Global Affairs Canada. In particular, we urge the subcommittee to look at how Canada can develop temporary and permanent relocation mechanisms for women human rights defenders at risk and their families. The first choice of many defenders is not to leave their country and their home. However, there are times when it is just too dangerous to stay, and this is where Canada could play a role with a rapid process to get women human rights defenders out of their countries and into Canada for either a respite stay or permanent relocation. A third area for recommendations is funding for women's rights organizations and feminist movements. We have heard over and over again from frontline defenders that their best protection is a strong movement behind them. Long-term, predictable core funding for women's rights organizations and feminist movements is key. When they are part of strong organization, women human rights defenders have support, they can develop and implement self-care strategies, they can incubate leaders, they develop effective strategies, and they work with others to hold governments accountable. Women human rights defenders around the world have developed integrated feminist protection strategies. These strategies highlight the importance of organizational resilience and collective models of self-care and integrated approaches to security. Key to this model is funding and support for their organizations. Yet the data shows that very little of Canada's international assistance finds its way to the brave organizations working on the ground on issues related to the human rights of women and girls. The latest figure we have is that in 2013-14, only 0.3% of Canada's gender-focused aid going to civil society, so not of our total aid budget, but just of this one subset, ended up in the hands of women's rights organizations. We know that this percentage will improve once two new funding initiatives get on track, Women's Voice in Leadership and the Gender Equality Partnership. However, still more can be done to fund these organizations. In addition, it is important to develop mechanisms to support displaced defenders. Many women human rights defenders have fled their homes and countries, and it is important that we find ways to support them as well, even though they are no longer eligible for funding via traditional development channels. The fourth area for recommendations is policy consistency and coherence. In order to be effective, specific approaches to women human rights defenders will work best when they are part of a broad overall strategy to make it safer for women activists to organize and speak out. It is important to ensure that all lines of Canadian policy and all international actions create and expand the space for civil society activists to operate. This includes building attention to human rights, including women's rights, into our trade deals. It includes speaking out for civil society spaces, including urging governments to lift restrictions on funding, respect political and civil rights, and promote gender equality. and it involves ensuring Canadian businesses respect human rights and environmental standards. Last September, I had the honor to meet Aniele Franco from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Aniele's sister, Marielle Franco, was an outspoken advocate for young people, poor Black communities, and LGBTIQ people. She also spoke out against police violence. She was murdered last year, yet Aniele continues to speak out for the same causes as her sister and push for justice. When I listen to brave women like Aniele, I know that Canada can and should do more. We thank the subcommittee for taking up this theme and for inviting us here today. There is a community of Canadian organizations eager to see Canada take a more effective and determined stand to support women human rights defenders and LGBTIQ defenders. In a world of increasing uncertainty and danger for women and sexual minorities who speak out, Canada's leadership is needed now more than ever. We welcome the questions from the subcommittee members and remain willing to support this critical study and positive steps to support women human rights defenders in any way possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those very informative presentations. And we will start our questions with Mr. Anderson for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being with us here today. I was just looking through some of the briefing material we got, and Ms. Woronek, it talks about MATCH being Canada's only global fund for women, girls, and transgender individuals. I'm just wondering, what is your budget from the Canadian government?
Currently, it's zero.
Okay.
We have just we were awarded a project in the fall, but we have not yet signed an agreement. So to date, we have since 2012 we have received no money from the Canadian government.
It's not accurate. It's anticipatory, I guess.
Yeah.
I would like to ask both of you, I guess, what do you see as the core units of social stability as you're moving ahead with your work? Do you find kind of as you're working on this, what is it that provides stability? What do you see the role of government or activist communities or families in terms of achieving the goals that you're working towards? Like what would you identify as those? Are there any? Because I mean things change around the globe, but what are you kind of hanging your notion of stability and achieving rights on?
That's an interesting question. I think we know that the rule of law is very, very important. We know that space for civil society organizations to speak out freely without intimidation is very important. We know that strong and diverse social movements are important to hold governments accountable for their policies and action. I haven't thought about it in that way, but maybe you have other things to add, Rachel.
I think those are excellent starting points. I think from a women human rights defender perspective, it's a complicated question, but a rule of law and justice comes up time and time again. So, for example, Canada's support for the CECIG, which is an anti-corruption, anti-impunity body in Guatemala, is seen by many women human rights defenders and organizations as an important way for a donor country to support ongoing justice efforts where there is failed, essentially in a situation where there's a failed state and failure to respond to the very real justice needs of local communities. So that's just one example, but in terms of providing stability for women human rights defenders, long-term core funding and stability for women's movements that are often the backbone and are responding when individual defenders are at risk. So the trend now is these networks, these regional networks that provide safety and relocation for individual women defenders when one is at risk. So say somebody's at risk in Nicaragua, they might be relocated to Mexico for temporary, for relief and while they get out of immediate danger, and then provided some support and then brought back to the country when necessary. Other defenders, like in conflict countries, as you know, the average conflict now is 7 to 15 years. So temporary relocation is no longer an option. Permanent relocation is really much more necessary than temporary locations. So, obviously, donor countries and countries like Canada can be helpful in looking at women human rights defenders as a category of refugees. How are we providing and supporting defenders who need essentially permanent relocation? So that's just
So you need those stable places that they can go then to, okay.
and networks that support
Yeah,
them.
I'd like you to talk a little bit more about impunity. I know it's a big subject or whatever because we tend to narrow it down to individual examples, but you talk a little bit more about that. You mentioned it in your presentation.
Yeah, well, in countries I've worked particularly on sexual violence for a number of years, and there's about a 98% impunity rate for sexual violence in many conflict countries like the DRC. So imagine 98%. It means that almost no cases move forward, almost no survivor of sexual violence gets their day in court. And when they do, rarely do they see true justice as a result of that judicial process. So there's high levels of impunity also in general for women across the board who are working as women human rights defenders. For intersectional reasons, to use some of the parlance, many of them are poor, indigenous, have limited access to their own judicial systems. And so the rates of impunity for attacks on them are very high.
This ties into something we've talked quite a bit about in terms of ISIS and the Nineveh Plains and the Yazidi communities and Christian communities that were decimated by that conflict. In terms of how do we reestablish some sort of a system that people can actually get justice? And I guess I'm interested in your perspectives. Do you think that those systems typically need to be established from outside, or can they come from inside? Because we've had that discussion here numerous times. So I'm just interested in your perspective on how do we bring about justice for people who have found themselves in those situations. Can it be done from inside, or does it have to come from outside?
I think I understand now where your question is coming from, and thank you for that clarification. And Beth will have no doubt some follow-up to this. Justice has to be built, in our view, or in my view, from within countries. And one of the best ways to build strong systems is to support civil society, and within that, women's movements and social movements, because as it happens here in Canada, so it happens everywhere, that really you need civil society pushing governments for, among other things, strong and functioning judicial systems. So I think that the international community has a strong role to play, and but I think that, again, from our perspective, and you heard Beth talk about funding, women's organizations can do a lot of the, and civil society in general can do a lot of the pushing of their own national governments and advocating with international community. And these are, the solutions have to be based on the ground where the problems are happening and where the violence and human rights or abuses are occurring.
And that's the end of our time for that question. So we will turn to Ms. Khalid for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your wonderful testimony today and for your hard work on this very important issue. We had the opportunity to go to New York and meet with some United Nations officials and heads of agencies there. And one thing that was brought up was, in terms of providing training for mediators in conflict areas between state and non-state actors. One thing that they're providing training on for mediators is the use of sexual violence as a tool. And how to include that in parts of negotiating peace between and within regions. And so it really got me to thinking, when we talk about human rights defenders and we talk about how women are treated, especially in conflict areas, and we talk about peace and security, in your opinion, on a larger systemic way, what kind of training can people on the ground be provided when it comes to providing support for women human rights defenders, as well as including them in the conversation of any peace negotiations?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a very, very important issue, and I think there's training and that's possible on a number of different levels. First is just the issue of awareness and alerting people to the issues, because even though we've had, as your chair knows, the Security Council resolution on women, peace, and security, which will turn 20 years old next year, we still have a long way to go just to put issues on the table in terms of how conflict affects women and men, boys and girls differently, and why this is important, and also to work through the different taboos that exist around addressing sexual violence. And this includes sexual violence against men, which is also a generalized part of conflict, but not talked about to the extent that it should be. So there's capacity needs around that. Then there are other kinds of capacity that how do you put a survivor-centered approach to sexual violence so that the survivor is in charge of or leading the process around what happens, rather than things happening to her and re-traumatizing. So there's training that's developed for healthcare providers, for judicial support workers, for trying to do an integrated support on that. Then there's also training in terms of legal redress, and as Rachel was saying, impunity for sexual violence is so high. So how do we improve the legal judicial ways that we operate on that? How do we help to make different people working in different fields aware of the issues and the responsibilities they have to deal with this? And then also in terms of people understanding the role that the security of women play in building peace. We often see this as a sideline, yet the research is that's coming in, it was really clear on this, that state security is tied to women's security. This is not an issue that we find peace and that we deal with these women afterwards. This is something that has to be integrated into our approaches to conflict prevention and conflict rebuilding, or else we actually won't have sustainable peace going forward. Lots more, but those are just a few ideas on your question. Thank you.
Thank you. I've two more. One more generally, how and this is a problem I feel like we face a lot as human rights defenders across the world, and we had a number of international women human rights defenders come before us from Kairos to share their experiences, and they're doing phenomenal work. I think the government just recently announced funding for them as well. How do we build male allies in providing that support for women human rights defenders on the ground? And secondly, we obviously have experienced in the past UN peacekeepers and their tendency towards sexual violence in conflict areas as well. And Canada's new initiative with respect to having more women peacekeepers, how would that impact? How would those two basically impact women's human rights defenders?
Want me to take the first part?
You want to take the male allies?
Yeah. Male allies. Well, that's, I think this is part of it, the conversation we're having here. But I think I was at the Human Rights Defenders World Summit in Paris in the fall, and even in those spaces, which are really focused on human rights defenders, that's the name of the summit, you really have to advocate and work within those spaces to raise the particular issues of women and LGBTQ defenders. And it's an awareness and an education process. Luckily, there is a growing body of research and a growing awareness of the particular and unique needs of people with disabilities and people and women and others who are who are all in that basket of human rights defenders. But building the male allies is part of that ongoing education process, because while they face sexual violence, they certainly don't face the same levels of sexual violence, and so on and so on. So I think public awareness and education and governments taking up this study and really focusing on women is a key part of that kind of public education, but also sending a strong message that there's a recognition of the legitimacy and credibility of women defenders and a need to focus on them in particular for protection and support.
On peacekeepers, yes, it's the move to get more women deployed as UN peacekeepers is very important. And Canada has an initiative called the ELSI Initiative, where they're seeking to support other countries to do that. And also there are targets within D&D on deploying more women. However, one of the keys to this is that it should not, the onus to deal with sexual violence should just not be on women deployed. It should be on all peacekeepers to have the skills to do this.
Thank you. And we will now move to Ms. Hardcastle for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. In the interest of time, instead of eloquently leading into this, I'm just going to be blunt, and hopefully it'll be a shortcut for you to understand my point. We were talking earlier about fostering this idea of gender equality within a male-dominated society, and as we move forward, we have men in a lot of decision-making positions right now. And in order to get women into those decision-making positions, we still have to have these men enlightened. And you were talking about training and how important that is. And I think, like, just an example that, the Gender Equity Awards or something that the United Arab Emirates had, and it's all men. And some people are rolling their eyes, but you can see a situation where it's so male dominated, at what point do we say that that's our priority to train? It's not just training women for, yeah, you're nodding your head, so you get what I mean. I'm just going to give you the floor.
I think it's a really good point, and thank you for the question. The thing that we've learned is that working towards gender equality is not just fixing women. It's not just giving women. It is important that women have more skills, more education, more access to credit, to build their own businesses. But we know that we have to look at that relationship between women and men. And that's where these discussions are so important. And I think that we've learned that change happens over generations. Some of the most interesting discussions I've had on gender roles and inequalities have been with my two sons. And I think this is the kind of discussion that it happens inside families, inside different organizations, inside religious organizations. It's the changing of these social norms that happen over time. And that's why often it's the women's organizations that are the key players in doing this. They know their local situation best. They know what kinds of arguments work in their communities. They can approach this issue in a very concrete and specific way and share strategies internally about what works. And so one of the best levers to actually move on changing social norms and social attitudes is a stronger support for women's rights organizations working at grassroots levels.
I was just going to add, one of the global challenges is fundamentalisms. And I say with an S because there are multiple forms of fundamentalism. And when I was working and researching a book a couple of years ago that included and documented stories of women human rights defenders, one of the stories was about a woman defender, Moroccan origin, living in France, who's trying to tackle the issue of young, because what we're seeing globally is a trend towards young men being more reactionary than some of the older men on women's rights. And so she had lost a son who had been recruited as a terrorist And she was going to schools in France and actually speaking to young people about her loss, but also about the role of young men and how they, what masculinity should be. And she's very powerful because she was speaking from a place of loss and having lost her son, but using that that personal experience to reach out to others. And again, it's because she understands the context. She understands the vulnerability, the poverty that they come from, the vulnerability that these young men experience. And she is from those communities that are where young men are being targeted for such activity. So again, to reinforce Beth's point with that example, I mean, just today I read that 2/3 of Afghan men oppose women's rights. But if you look at the trend, it's the older men who are more flexible on that point and more willing to actually consider women's rights to be something of value as opposed to the younger men in Afghanistan. So I think those are the kind of things that, again, women's rights organizations on the ground would know better than we would of where the pressure points are to address those issues.
You're good. 2 more minutes.
Oh, okay. And so, in terms of, that Canada is funding a couple of initiatives right now, and targeting training for human rights defenders. Is there, should we be finessing this? Do you see that this should be finessed more towards the local, or do you think what we're doing right now is the right approach and it just needs to build momentum?
Well, thank you for the question. I think one of the key elements is that there's not one right training approach, so that really local, and it's these organizations of defenders usually know what they need. They usually know the skills that they're lacking and where to get them, and they're often best placed to design their own training. So supporting these organizations is the best way to go, rather than us designing a made in Canada training program that we think people should take. You can sense a theme here that we really think local women's organizations are best placed and suited and know the solutions, but what they often lack are the resources to put their plans into action.
Go ahead.
If I could add another example, I was stumbling over at the end of my presentation to talk to you about these Yemeni women. So I was invited to train them on some media training because they want to access, obviously, more Western media to explain their analysis of how to end war in Yemen. But what they asked as a follow-up, so I'll probably be going back, is they want training on UN Security Council Resolution 1325 as a framework, because they're trying to, going back to your point about mediators, they're interested. One of the things we hear over and over again at the UN is, but there aren't enough qualified women to sit around the peace table. Well, there are. But these women are very aware that this is a critique, and so they've been training themselves up to be, mediators, to actually know the 1325 framework and how to do peace negotiations. So that's the kind of training they're asking for us. But again, it's coming from them. We are not telling them.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask members to keep this round to 4 minutes so that we don't run out of time. And we'll start with Mr. Fredriskatos for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here today. I've had the pleasure of hearing both of you testify in other committee settings. And on the topic of UN Resolution 1325, I think it's quite apropos that it comes up here today. It sounds like women human rights defenders, in and of itself, the idea of defending their interests is a moral good. But beyond that, if we're trying to, in our foreign policy and our international development policy, if we're trying to champion the idea of peace, we know that there is very good empirical evidence that says that when women are involved in negotiating peace after conflict, those societies remain much more stable. But it sounds like when women human rights defenders are involved in a peace process, they might be your best bet. Can you, because they have so much experience in terms of the politics, understanding the political situation in a society, understanding what is necessary and needed in terms of restoring that society, its legal system, its political system, its socioeconomic situation. Would that be a good guess there? You okay?
Yes, thank you for that observation. That point is right on target. And one of the elements of the research that sometimes people overlook is that it's not just involving women, any women in peace processes. It's when women that have support behind them of a civil society connections, and that they have a meaningful space to operate in those peace negotiations. And so that's exactly the role that women human rights defenders can play, because they have those connections, that they have that experience. They often come out of a particular area where they have knowledge of judicial issues, or they have knowledge of how things operate in a particular geographic context, or they may have strong relationships with community and religious leaders, and that helps them then knit communities together and build peace.
Yeah, I think it's quite important. It's not just about, as you say, adding women to the political process, or to the peace process, I should say, and then you have a much more promising opening towards a peaceful path. It's about recognizing that particular lived experiences stand out, and when we're talking about women human rights defenders, they have a very unique experience that ought to be recognized. And so when Canada and other democracies wish to advocate for peace, then we ought to be championing the cause of women human rights defenders if we're interested in finding a sustainable path towards peace in various conflicts. Last question to you. And I very much support everything that you're doing, but I worry sometimes when countries in the West in particular, actually not in particular, Western countries, when politicians stand up and say that we ought to get behind X, Y, or Z cause, X, Y, or Z cause in a particular country, that can then be spun by opponents of peace defenders in the target country to say, well, these women human rights defenders, to use this example, they have the backing of the Canadians and the Americans and the Europeans. They're advocating for outside interests, and it can actually make their situation on the ground even worse, because they're seen as not being of the society. If you catch if you know where I'm going with it, I think there's ways around this. But what would you counsel in this situation? Because
unfortunately, we don't have time for the answer, but you may be able to revert back in one of the future questions. We will be going to Mr. Sweet for 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And really, from the bottom of my heart, I just want to say thank you for your great work and your courage and just, the capability of finding or being available for women who are in desperate situations, like from Yemen or the Yazidi women that have been mentioned. Just want to thank you very much for the good work you do. I want to, you mentioned, and I agree with you totally, that one of the most important works is to support and fund local women's organizations to make sure that they're building bench strength, for, if I use a sports metaphor, in the local area to, have change happen. But there's the World Wide Web is a great tool for good and a great tool for evil. And there's all kinds of production of demeaning material that's on the web. I don't need to go through the long litany of it. But I find that some of the disturbing discussions I have with young men are from material that they've seen on the web and have come up with presuppositions of how women should be treated. Is there, whether your group or groups or others, is there a strategy around, and of course, anything criminal, obviously raising that awareness to law enforcement, but just to monitor it and name and shame or whatever, or re-educate so that these things don't have the power that the World Wide Web can give them?
Thank you for the question. I think there are numerous strategies and numerous organizations working to try to address this issue. We do hear from women human rights defenders that digital security is of prime importance. As Rachel said, a lot of young women get targeted. We know a lot about trolls. But it is often very, very hard to counteract. There are some groups do security training. Some of it even revolves around how to keep your phone safe. Like there's digital security on another area as well, in terms of if you're an activist, what you have on your phone and how that could work. I think it's not an easy issue to address. But there are groups, and we'd be happy if digital security is something the committee would like to take up. We'd be happy to recommend groups working in that area for you to come before you to explore that issue more. Did you?
Yeah, I would say actually one of the young women that we brought to Canada for 6 weeks a few years ago is actually an expert on digital security. She works in Guatemala and she works with community organizations on trainings herself on digital security. She's a young Indigenous activist and she's fabulous. So it would be great to hear from people on the ground how they're dealing. Women's organizations are highly creative in dealing with digital threats, from Iran to Guatemala and everywhere in between. One of the things I have learned from them is they have a lot to teach us, actually.
But the both aspects too. That
Yeah.
I understand the individual digital security, but also the broader false education about what trying to posit women in a very terrible light, so that the mistreatment is perpetuated.
It's a problem globally for all of us.
Oh, it sure is. Yeah. Okay, 20 seconds. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I wish we had more time because I think there's a lot of information here. We will go to Mr. Hare for 4 minutes.
Very much for your very enlightening presentation. And I note that you indicated earlier that one of the things you're most concerned of for women human rights defenders and human rights offenders in general is that safe passage to other jurisdictions in times of conflict, in times of strife, and with climate change, with conflict around our government. I wonder if you could comment about whether or not being involved in things like the UN Compact on migration and other things like that are important for the government of Canada to be involved in, whether these type of institutions through the United Nations helps women defenders of human rights?
Do you want to? I don't think either one of us, at least I can speak for myself. I'm not an expert on migration per se, and I think that that's an important element to address in your study. That's why one of our recommendations focuses on the both permanent and temporary relocation needs of women human rights defenders, and to be speaking to IRCC as well as to human rights defenders and others on the list that we submitted. But I do think, global migration is at an all-time high, and defenders among those that are needing relocation. And so it is increasingly a reality that we are all living. And Canada, as a country that has brought Syrians in, for example, is a country that is looked to by human rights defenders. So I think that's a role that we need to take seriously and look at. That's why we hope that you'll cover it in your study.
And of course, Canada being part of the United Nations systems, we do rely heavily on UN institutions. Certainly the work that immigration, I always have the new name, IRCC, relies heavily on UNHCR, the refugee organization for the identification of women at risk and other refugees. So certainly it's part of the global system that we operate on, and a strong multilateral system can serve Canada well.
Well, I think this will be probably the last question. Do you have any best practices that you think we need to take note of at this time that you would ask us to follow up on or hear about? Any best practices out there in the field that were not touched on here at this time?
Well, I mentioned some in terms of how the different European countries offer respite and quick visas to get defenders out of emergency situations. That's something that Canada could take another look at. It would be interesting that the government of Sweden has piloted an emergency bracelet program, Project Natalia, where defenders have a bracelet that they can activate if they become picked up by authorities. That might be something to look at. And certainly the way different governments fund organizations that support defenders would be something that would be really important to look at as well, through their aid programs or through their other ways, given the importance that these networks of women human rights defenders and LGBTIQ defenders, how we can best support those movements are really important as well.
I just want to respond to your last point, your last question, which is, okay, very fast. I think that countries like Canada have a huge role to play within the UN system on advocating for women's inclusion and peace processes. The UN can be a hostile environment for women human rights defenders, and Canada has played a good behind-the-scenes role in the past, and so just short answer.
Thank you very much. And we will go to our last question, Ms. Hardcastle, for 4 minutes.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Vincent, for that last comment. I think it's important that Canada understand its role and its purpose above and beyond the UN as well. And we discussed earlier about some of the training that Canada is putting funding into right now. Do you see some synergies that we should be leveraging right now for not just the human rights defenders, but you mentioned we do have challenges for LGBTQ2 community members. And possibly even when we talked about men that are in vulnerable populations, what are some of the synergies in training that we can be, or the low-hanging fruit, if you will?
Well, if I can answer in terms not just of training, but overall support, it is one of the items in our current international assistance policy to funnel money to and support local women's rights organizations as a driver of change. And we think this is a very positive and admirable goal. One of the challenges is that there are still many bureaucratic obstacles that stand in the way of reaching those organizations with our development assistance funding, and that would be something that would be important to look at. Is how can we ensure that the groups on the ground are actually getting some of the support that they need? So that's one really crucial part, that we make sure that our practice matches our policy and our rhetoric on these issues.
Good. And in that case, I want to thank our witnesses for, I think, what was a very, very good first meeting on this topic to introduce us to the topic, and thank the members. And with that, we are adjourned.